once we got out there, we're like, man, I feel like such a badass. You know, just think about and look back on, kind of what you climbed up, to get there, and just like you're on top of the world, looking at everything.
Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures Podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks, and today we're going to not one, but 5 national parks, all in Utah. They're called the Big Five, and I have personally done most of this myself. In fact, I'm en route, actually, as I'm editing this, heading out that way because I got so inspired. I was like, I want to go do it again, and I think you're going to thoroughly enjoy our visit to these Utah national parks. We're going to Zion, Capitol Reef, Canyonlands, Arches, Bryce Canyon, as well as the really cool, funky town of Moab. It is one of the most unusual, moonscapey, red rocky, hoodoo-making, exciting landscape I think I've ever been to, and I can't wait to share it with you. So let's get started. Oh, and one other thing before we get started, this interview does run long because after we talk about the trip itself, we talk about travel, so I think there's some interesting conversation towards the end that has nothing to do with Utah, but about adventure travel in general. So with that, let's get started. We have with us Allie, who I've asked to come on the show today to tell us about her Utah National Parks adventure. And so Allie, welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks. It's good.
Before we get started, just so people have an idea of who Allie is, would you mind telling us your age and maybe a little bit of your background in doing these adventurous type of vacations?
Sure. My name is Allie. I'm originally from Texas, but I lived in Indiana for the last several years. I am 47 years old, and my adventure trip started way back 2006. I wanted to go on some big adventure vacation now that I was a big girl and had a big girl job. And so I picked a random adventure vacation. I had never been hiking. I had never done any of that stuff, but I went on it and I was totally hooked and been doing them every year since.
What adventure did you pick for that first inaugural one?
My first one, I went to New Zealand. That's where I found Active Adventures. The company, they're based in New Zealand, and I took their trip and I absolutely loved it. I thought they do a fabulous job in running their trips. Their trip descriptions are 100% accurate. If you read their website and their itineraries, that's what it is. And I've done several of their trips and I've just loved them. But I chose New Zealand initially. Someone recommended, why don't you try New Zealand? They speak English, they use dollars. It was a good first place to try out an adventure on my own.
Well, definitely. That's like the top bucket item. I mean, New Zealand's like the pinnacle of great adventure holidays.
Yes, it's one of my places. I've been there twice now, North Island and South Island.
Cool. And what other trips did you do with Active?
I've done one of their trips to Nepal, hiked the Annapurna Sanctuary.
That's a very challenging hike.
Yeah, it was great. It was a couple weeks before that big earthquake that happened.
Oh, wow.
Years ago.
And I interviewed Stan about that. So I'll put a link in the show notes if people want to find out what Annapurna in Nepal is all about. But that's a super challenging hike. And you can also do lodge if you don't want to be that hardcore.
There's lots of stairs. They do good about acclimating you, not going so far to help you acclimate to the altitude and stuff. I have done the Galapagos Islands trip.
I'm doing that next year. I'm really excited about that. How'd you like that one?
I loved it. It's not as active per se as a lot of the other trips, but what you're seeing and doing there is just, you're not going to get an experience like that anywhere else in the world.
That's for sure. Yeah, that's really cool. I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to do that one and the Ecuador trip with them next year.
I haven't done Ecuador. I think I've done 8 of their trips now.
So this last year during COVID, you decided to go on another trip. So you went on a US-based trip. So
yes, I did. I had another overseas trip planned, back in May, and COVID hit. So that obviously got canceled. And so I was trying to find something in the US, and I came across the Utah trip. And I've never really vacationed in the United States that much because when I go, I like to go. I take 3 weeks off and go spend a lot of time. But I found the Utah trip and I'm like, I've always wanted to go there and see the national parks. And so I was like, this is a great opportunity.
I think the national parks in Utah now, and I must say I'm biased, but I haven't seen all of them, but they are among my favorites.
Yes.
The landscape is almost like moonscape. So today we are going to 5 of the Utah national parks. So why don't you just name the ones that you went to, and then we'll back and we'll go in a little bit more detail.
Okay. Well, we started up north. I flew into Grand Junction. And side note, if you fly into Grand Junction, that is like one of the tiniest airports I've ever been in. So you need to make sure you have a way to get from the airport to the hotel, wherever you're going, because there's no taxis just kind of waiting out there for you when you leave.
I will put on the travel planner for here, because they also have the airport that flies into St. George, which is where I believe you started your tour. That's closed right now for renovations because of a bad runway or whatever. When I went out there, I actually flew into Las Vegas. You can go into Salt Lake City, Vegas, where you can actually get cheaper airfares, and they have shuttle services that'll get you to St. George. And so that...
Yeah, we did the trip north to south. So we started in Grand Junction and then made our way down to St. George. You can definitely fly into St. George. They'll get you there. I just chose to fly into Grand Junction because it was closer to Moab. I went a few days early and went to Moab. You know, it's the biking capital of the world. So I felt obligated to go mountain biking since I was there.
Now, did you mountain bike before, or did you do it just because you're in Moab?
I really did it just because I was in Moab. I am a road biker, so I love to bike. I never really mountain biked before, so I took a day. I hired a private guide just to take me out to some of the easy courses, got some lessons, learned some tips to help me, and then just spent the day mountain biking.
That is so cool. That whole town.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I actually bought a mountain bike, so I have a mountain bike now.
Oh, good for you. No, I mean, I'm going to do that when I go out, because I'm getting ready to head out in my van and I'm heading west. I will be spending time in Utah. And I've only mountain biked a couple of times. It's a lot of fun. And you were smart enough to hire a private guide to kind of, A, take you to trails that you could handle, and B, tell you what to do and help you.
Yeah, it was great. It was very helpful, and it was a lot of fun.
If you have the opportunity, Moab is just a chill, fun town. Everybody in town is walking. They've all done something fun that day, and
Yes.
Their faces are all just full of smiles. It's wonderful.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to do out there in that area.
So you said before and after your trip, you spent some time. So did you do it on both ends of the trip?
Yes, I did it on both in the trip. Since I'm typically accustomed to going on vacation for 2 or 3 weeks, like a little 1-week trip was very out of the norm for me. So I'm like, oh, I need some extra days. You know, I always like to spend a few extra days just kind of chilling and interacting with the local people and the culture and kind of getting a feel for the town and the vibe, as opposed to just kind of bang, 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 doing the top 5 highlights and being done.
And when you say are you traveling solo or were you with somebody?
Traveled solo for, the beginning and end of the organized trip. It was just myself, but then organized part of the trip, I was with a group.
All right. So after Moab and all that, so then you joined up with the Active Adventure, who I must mention is one of my affiliate companies. And I highly adore that company, which is why I recommend them and always interview a lot of people from their tours.
Yes, I love that company. I've done 8 of their trips.
8. Wow.
Mm-hmm. It's fantastic. I still have Iceland and Africa those are the 2 big trips
I'm hoping to go on their Africa trip in 2023. We got to coordinate.
Oh yeah.
That would be fun. Okay.
That would be awesome.
Okay. So let's get back to Utah then. So you finally connect up with the active people. And so tell us about meeting the group and how all that went.
We met at the hotel early. We started in Grand Junction. We met at the hotel in the morning, the specified time. They texted us the night before to kind of say, we're meeting in the hotel lobby at this time. If you weren't staying in the hotel that we're meeting at, they arranged pickup transport for you from the hotels, or if you happen to be flying in early that morning. But we met, as a big group. Everybody introduced themselves, told a little bit about them, and got the initial rules and regulations, and here's how things are going to run. And then we got in the vans and headed out to go hike.
Now, domestic travel, U.S. domestic travel, just due to COVID, really intensified because it's one of the few things we could do, plus an outdoor activity. So how big was your group? I imagine that people were kind of into doing this trip.
Yes, I think we had about 13.
Okay. So you're at
Um,
the max size. So could you tell us a little bit about like the composition? Was it couples? Was it solos? What age groups?
there were a few couples that were traveling together, like two sets of friends. There were several singles. We probably aged in range from 30s. I'm not good at guessing ages, but our age range probably early to mid 30s up to 70s. One of the guys actually had his 70th birthday during the trip.
How about that? So yeah, nice broad thing. And then also too, they don't charge a solo supplement. So you can either pay a solo supplement if you want your own room, or they'll pair you up with somebody if you don't want to pay that, which is kind of nice too.
Yes, it's nice. I always choose to room with a random person, if there's one that matches up. To me, that's part of the fun experience as well. Just, kind of getting to know.
And you're almost like pre-selected to be almost like-minded because you've chosen the same type of active trip.
Yes, for sure. It's someone that's active, and yeah, you're not getting somebody that's gonna, oh my gosh, we have to go hiking again.
Or we're gonna get dirty, or all that stuff. So
yeah, you don't have as many what I would call high maintenance types.
Right. That's a very nice way
on the trip.
Yes. So what was the first thing you guys did as a fun adventure?
First thing we did was we made the drive from Grand Junction down to Moab is where we started. And we went to Canyonlands National Park and did some hiking out there. We hiked out to the Mesa Arch, which is kind of one of those iconic arches that's photographed. When I saw it, I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's a random screensaver that shows up on my computer. It was one of those iconic arches. And it's just so cool to see the landscape out there, the different rock layers and the different colors, and just to think how all this formed over time with just wind, water, and God.
Right. Try to describe that landscape.
Lots of red rock. Part of the drive, you're just going through just these big, huge red rock canyons, these red rock walls that are just on both sides of you that you're driving through. And it's interesting because you'll see just a sheer red rock wall, and then you hit a different layer of rock where it almost looks kind of like a rock slide. There's like little chunks of rocks. It looks sandy. Then you might hit like another layer of a different kind of rock layer. We learned all the different rock layers. I don't remember them.
Although there's a lot of sandstone, as I recall. That's one reason with the wind that it makes it easier to road. And each of the parks seem to have its own personality.
Yes, they do. It's for the most part, you're in, looking at canyons and that kind of stuff the whole time. So it's similar in that, you're seeing all these different canyons, but they're so different. They're different because of the areas that they're in, elevation, how much wind and water, how close to the water they are over time. And a lot of it is also the type of minerals that are in the different layers. Some places there are a lot more, I think it's manganese deposits that turn things this like beautiful purple kind of color. So you have these random spots of just these cool, I don't know how to describe it, just these random colors that permeate throughout the rock, different rock layers.
Cool. So had you ever been to any kind of landscape like canyon? I know by the end of your trip, you're very used to the whole red rock, but I just remember being just astonished because I was like, this isn't our country.
Yes. And one of the drives that we did the second day, we drove out to, and I drove the road before, right before the trip personally down my way to Moab. One of the big recommendations is when you're going from Grand Junction to Moab is to take the scenic byway. I mean, you can take the interstate and get there quick, all interstate, but there's a scenic byway 128, which is a relatively famous, so to speak. It winds around right by the Colorado River. And most of the entire road is just these huge, sheer red rock canyon walls. And it's just like, you can't help but just stop at all the little turnouts that they have to just get out of the car and just stare at what you're looking at. It's just so incredible and amazing just to kind of look at.
And I highly recommend when you're out there to look at the sunrises and sunsets, because when that light hits just right at the beginning and the end of the daylight, it's like the land is on fire.
Yes, it totally is. Especially, we really noticed that a lot at the end of the trip when we were in Zion.
Yes.
Our hotel was right across from one of the big mountain canyon. I'm not sure which one it is, but every morning throughout, all the trip, we had beautiful sunrises that we could just, we could go stand out on our balcony and just watch, and it's just amazing. And sunsets too at night. Several of the places we went at night, there are very few clouds there. So like when you look at pictures, you see all this blue sky and you're like, oh, someone did some good photoshopping to take the clouds away. And it's you didn't. Like those are like hashtag no filter. That is what it looks like. It's that blue. Initially, when we were up further north, we did see a little bit of haze from all the wildfires were strongest in California. So we did get some of the little haze drifting in.
That also makes for very pretty sunsets, though. Yes,
it does. I read one of the places that if you're up in the area is to go to Dead Horse Point State Park, that's one of the places that I went right before the trip started, because everyone says if you want to see a sunset, go here and see. And it was, just incredible sunsets.
And I think it's something with the wildfires, the particulates in the air do something to reflect that light somehow, and it just get these nice burnt orange colors. It's really, really pretty. So,
yes.
What about I know we should be talking about the hiking and all that too, but while we're talking about the skies and all that, did you get to see much of a night sky, the stars, the constellations?
Yes. Oh my gosh. More in the middle of the trip. The beginning of the trip, we were staying in Moab, so we were staying kind of downtown. But once we got out of Moab, you're staying, like some of your hotels are kind of in the middle of nowhere for a few of them. And so it's like you just go sit out on your balcony and you just have this beautiful landscape and mountains, and the landscape you're seeing is different from what you just saw the day before. And at night, because there's no clouds in the sky. And so you just see stars.
Very cool.
It's beautiful. Like lots of just fascinating, just go lay out on the grass and just stare at the sky.
And so anything else about Moab we need to talk about before we move on to Arches?
It's a really cool little town. It's just, it's got a fun vibe, such an adventurous kind of vibe. Everyone that's visiting there and everyone that lives there, they're just totally into doing what I call just cool adventure stuff. Everybody mountain bikes, or they hike, and it's a very outdoorsy, just a neat vibe. The other thing we did in Moab before we went to Arches is we drove up the scenic byway again, and we went to Fisher's Towers.
What is Fisher's Towers?
It's a hiking place and also a climbing place. Fisher's Towers, they're gigantic, just red rock canyon wall, in all different kinds of shapes and formations. And there's lots of spires, up at the top. There's one huge spire. It's called Corkscrew. It's a popular place for climbers. And when we were there were actually climbers going up. We actually, we stood there for a little bit and watched a climber make it to the top of the spire and stand up. And we were out clapping and yelling for them, and they waved at us. It was kind of cool just to see this tiny little speck of a person way up there, because it's so far away, because it was so high. And that one was really neat because you are literally right up there against the canyons. Just reach out and feel the canyon wall just as you're walking along.
Really nice.
Nice. And then on the way home, we stopped. After the hike, we drove down a little bit and we stopped at a nice little beach, really down on the Colorado River. And, we had lunch and then, jump in, take a swim in the river, and nice, relaxing day.
Good. And you were there a good time of year too, because probably if you had to pick the best months, it could be like April, May, and September, October. And you were there September, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, the last week of September, and it was great. The weather was perfect, sunny. It wasn't too hot, wasn't too cool. To me, it was ideal.
Elevation change differences too, which I was surprised when I was doing my research. I didn't realize that, St. George's can be really hot, but then you're at sometimes 4,000, oftentimes at like 4,000 foot elevation and can get up as high as 7,000.
Yes. When they sent me the pre-trip information, they're very good about sending, here's a packing list. Here's the things you really have to have that we suggest. And, one of the things that they listed on there was, bring a pair of thermals, bring a warm hat. And I looked at it kind of funny and I was like, why would I need all this warm stuff? It's just September, it's Utah.
Desert.
That is desert, canyon kind of area. But I was like, they say that was on the must. So I brought one and I was so glad I did, because once you get to Bryce Canyon, where we were towards the end of the trip, it's over 7,500 feet elevation.
Right. And so you mentioned before, no clouds means as soon as that sun goes down, all that heat dissipates.
Yes. So it was colder than I expected it to be. But, when you realize you're at over 7,000 feet, that's part of the reason that Bryce Canyon is so beautiful, because you get the cold, you get the freezing and the thawing, form the different hoodoos and the rock layers out there. But Bryce Canyon is below freezing 230 days of the year.
Wow.
So yeah, that was surprising to me, but
that's very interesting.
But other than Bryce Canyon, the weather is very nice. Into September, it's shorts and a t-shirt, some layers. You might have, a long sleeve or a light jacket on in the morning until the sun really kind of comes up over the canyon walls and shining more directly on you. But it was shorts and a t-shirt for me. And I tend to run on the cold side, of the temperature scale a lot, but it was perfect weather for me.
So from Moab, then you go to Arches, which I remember when I was out there, I was like, oh, do I need to see another park? And then I got to Arches, like, oh, definitely. Yes, I'm glad we came to this park. Tell us about Arches.
Yeah, Arches was really, oh my God, there's so many arches that are there. But that's the morning we got up early, one of those, oh my gosh, we have to get up so early to leave. But we went so we could be there for sunrise. And so we left early and got to the park and hiked up to Delicate Arch, which is another one of the iconic kind of photos. When you look at photos of Utah, Delicate Arch is one of the iconic arches that you'll see in all the brochures and the photos.
Do you remember why they formed the arches? I remember why they formed the fins, but I don't remember what causes the arches.
I think it's water. I think it's water and wind that just have moved through and erode the rock. And there's a definition. It has to be, I can't remember. I would have to go back and look it up. But there's a certain distance, like the widest point of the arch has to be so many feet to be considered an arch. Otherwise, it's a window. And then once it erodes wide enough, whatever that number criteria is, then it's considered an arch. But I think I kind of think it's wind and water that's done it.
But it's just really cool. It's just one arch after another. And then, well, tell us about, you were there more recently than me. It's been 10 years since I've been there. I want to hear all about it.
Yeah. Arches, we started at, like I said, Delicate Arch for sunrise. It's just beautiful. There were a lot of people there, obviously, for a sunrise. That's one of the big, places to go see them. We actually watched someone propose underneath the arch. That was kind of fun. And also, one of the things that we learned when we were there, two of the big arches to go see is there's Delicate Arch and Landscape Arch. Those are, two of the kind of famous arches that are there that most people, those are the two big ones, two of the big ones to go see. And they are actually have opposite names. Because if you look at Delicate Arch, the top part of the arch is wide. It's not like a little thin strip, but it's called Delicate Arch. And when you go and you see landscape arch, the top of that arch, it's a very thin layer. It is very thin, and you can see some days that's going to crack and fall and it's not going to be an arch because it's so thin and delicate. And the story that we learned about it was when they went to put the signs up, when it was kind of becoming to be a thing and forming its national park type stuff, when they put the signs up, they put the signs in the wrong place.
Oh, funny.
So landscape arch is actually formationally a delicate arch. And the one that we call delicate arch is actually a landscape type of arch.
That's funny.
Yeah, that was fun.
So, and you also went to Devil's Garden. I'm trying to remember. I probably went there, but I don't remember what it was. What was that?
There's a different kind of landscape. Going out to Delicate Arch is a lot of rock. You're walking and hiking on just like solid, flat type of rocks. It's a very easy hike. It's relatively flat. There's not a lot of up and down with that one per se. And Devil's Garden is still an easy, relatively flattish kind of walk, but the scenery that you're walking through to get to those arches is very different. You're not walking on solid rock. It's more, you're walking among the little, they call them trees, I call them bushes, but just the landscape is kind of different getting there. But there are some great arches over there. There's a cool, I think it's called the Double O. It's neat. And the Partition. And that area is cool because you can walk up kind of through them and you can see them from both sides, which is interesting. You just get a totally different perspective looking at the arch from one side and then, kind of hiking around to the back and seeing it. We went through a lot of the slot canyons, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a narrow space between two of the canyon walls. That's one of the nice places. We stopped and had lunch in one of the slots. We just walked up to this cool, up in the middle of the slot canyon. And, you can find little benches and seats to sit on, just how the rock has formed. But that's kind of a neat, just to hang out, have lunch in the middle of this beautiful place that you're in.
If you're into rocks and landscape, the Utah parks are just spectacular.
Yes.
Truly one of the most unique and striking places I've ever seen.
I've never seen anything like it.
From Arches, you went someplace I did not go, and that was to Capitol Reef. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Capitol Reef, after Arches, we were driving through to Capitol Reef, which is another one of their national parks. I do remember driving on the way, we stopped for a potty break at this little gas station that is literally, it's built into the side of this huge rock mound. That was just, that was kind of neat. One of the cleanest bathrooms. We gave it points for having the cleanest bathroom. But, like you're walking through the store and it's just rock formation over the top of your head. It's not like there's a roof there. It's the rock. Yeah, so that was just a fun little, we really were just stopping to grab a drink and go to the bathroom, but it was like, that's so cool. Just a random little stop in between getting from place to place. But Capitol Reef, that's one of the places where we had the most beautiful night sky. And again, the colors are amazing. It's similar, but it's so completely different than what we had just seen at Canyonlands and Arches. One of the big places that we went in Capitol Reef was we hiked Cohab Canyon because the Utah is a big Mormon settlement. And back in the early days, when multiple wives started falling out of favor, so to speak, this was a place where they would go and essentially kind of hide because of all the slot canyons and the nooks and crannies there. Like, it's very easy to see how you could hide in there forever. So interesting name, but that was one of the big settlements that they had because it is right near the river. And so that was one of the big places that the Mormons settled. And so they planted orchards and gardens, etc. there, that you just have these random beautiful apple orchards, and it almost just kind of looks out of place where you are, the rock and the canyon, etc. They still have the original orchards that they maintain and are still there. and you can go and pick the apples. And after we got done with the hike, we went down to the orchard and we picked apples, and we all had our apple. And that's just kind of a neat little experience when you think about that. The hike itself is very fun. It's a little more challenging than the others, but it's not quite as flat as what we had been. So there's definitely more of an up and over. They have a lot of what we called Swiss cheese rocks in the side of the walls. It literally just looks like Swiss cheese. There's just all these big holes. There is an area on the canyon walls where you can see petroglyphs that they've been dated from 300 to 1300 AD. It looks like what you see in books, kind of stuff. When you see the pictures in books, you can kind of see the story that they're telling, so to speak.
Okay. And because next you're going to one of my all-time favorite parks. So tell us about
Bryce Canyon was my absolute fave.
That's my favorite too.
The landscape, the things there are 100% absolutely completely different. And it was my favorite. There's the hoodoos. They call them hoodoos.
Yeah, describe a hoodoo for us.
They're like statues, so to speak, that are just doesn't look like a person, or so to speak, but they're just like individual statue totem pole kind of things that are just all over. They're just all kinds of random shapes. There's all kinds of colors in them. It's just formed by the freezing and thawing. This was the morning where you start out in all your layers. You start out with your thermals and your jacket and your warm hat on. I think it was 29 degrees when we started in the morning. And you're up at such a high elevation and it gets so cold all the time. When it rains, the water gets in between the rocks and it freezes. And so when it freezes, it expands. And then when it thaws, then you have all these cool cracks in the rocks. And then when you add the wind on top of that, wind blowing through there, you just get these crazy rock formations.
I was trying to think of how I could describe it, because for people that have no idea,
it's like
picture you're like at the beach and you're a kid, or you're playing by where the water has just left, the ocean's just left, and the water's that semi-hard, and you grab it in your hand and you plop little pieces down at a time and stack them, and just one right after another. It's just like 1,000. In fact, I think they call it candles at sunrise. It's like lighting 1,000 candles, all these different upright rock formations.
Yes. I mean, it's one of those, it's hard to describe without just seeing a picture. The hike that we did here, this hike was a bigger hike lengthwise and up and down elevation gain and loss. We did a big loop around the inner canyon. Another fun fact I learned, Bryce Canyon is technically not a canyon because it was not formed by a river. Technically, it is an amphitheater.
Interesting.
And it was discovered, this is one of my favorite stories, discovered by Ebenezer Bryce, he had lost one of his cows. And so he was out looking for his cow that he had lost, and he stumbled upon the canyon. And the famous quote that's attributed to him when people were asking him about it, he said, "It's a hell of a place to lose a cow."
That's great.
Yeah. But we did a hike. We went down into the canyon, which is so neat because then you're just looking up, at all these. It's awesome to see it from the top when you initially walk in and you see everything from the top down. See all the formations and the spires and the ridges. There's so much texture. That's another good word. There's so much texture to this area. And you walk in, on top of the canyon rim, and you're just breathless. So you just kind of stand there forever, just staring in awe at all this. And then we hiked down into the canyon, and we made a big figure 8, basically all through the canyon. We did over 8 miles. There was a lot of up and down with it.
On a scale of 1 to 5, let's rank for the hardest so that people know, like, where would you put the difficulty of this trip? And was this the hardest hike of the whole trip?
Yes, probably this and Angel's Landing, I would say, are about the same. This one, there was a lot of up and down. You don't necessarily do it all at once. Like you hike down and then you're kind of walking flat and some rollers. You know, you'll stop here and you learn a story, some of the history and about the rocks and stuff. You take breaks so that you can rest a little bit, catch your breath, so to speak. And
the guides keep a lookout for that. Did you have 2 guides?
We actually had 3.
3 guides.
Because yes, we had 3 because of COVID. They added an extra van.
Okay.
Normally they wouldn't have had an extra van, but they added an extra van so that we could all spread out more, socially distanced. And so because they added an extra van, they went ahead and added a 3rd guide. That was great because then at that point, we usually had 3 guides doing all the hikes with us. Sometimes we would just have 2 because someone had to go gas up the van and take care of things, or they had to drive farther away to go park the van. But we usually had 3 guides. Someone was always in the front, someone was always in the back, and then we had one that always kind of stayed in the middle. And they're very good about letting people do their own thing in their own pace, but still keeping the group together. Because, in a group, you're always going to have people that are, they're the hikers and they're quick and they're fast and that kind of thing. You're always going to have people that are slower. And then you have people that stop and take pictures of every single thing. So they always made sure we were, hydrated and had enough food, snacks. They carried so much water. A lot of times they're like, are you sure you don't need any more water in your bottle? Because the more water they get rid of, the less their backpack weighs.
So in your own pack, I assume you're carrying some water and snacks and stuff like that yourself, as well as a jacket or something?
Yes, I just had a little backpack that had a Camelback, just a small backpack, not even a full 20 liter. I just had probably like a 15 liter, small backpack that had some days in the mornings. So make your sandwich and get your chips and your fruit and your granola bars or whatever. So you carry your lunch, and then I might have a jacket, might have a rain jacket stuffed in there. Sometimes if you're a couple, the husband carries one backpack for both of you.
And to reel back to the difficulty level on 1 to 5, thinking of Zion and Bryce's, where would you put the difficulty level here?
I would just say more like a 3. Okay. I mean, it's not technical by any means. This is just one of those days where it's much longer than what we did on the other days. But there is also an option. That's one of the other things that they did a great job with, is if you're tired and you just don't want to hike more, usually there was a point, kind of a halfway point in the day, where they would give us options. If you're tired of hiking, or, you've got an injury, and your knees can't take it anymore or whatever, there was always an option to do a different, smaller hike where you're still seeing a lot of the same things and the amazing, beauty. You're not missing out on the experience by any means, but you can just do a shorter distance or a flatter distance. There was a couple times where they would get in the car and they'd drive around to another side of the canyon to do smaller hikes in other places, but that was always an option. And that was an option on this trip. And they're good about explaining and telling you what's coming so you can make your decision. But there was more up and down on that. It's not technical kind of thing. You're just walking. And it's also different sides of the canyon, from this side to that side. The colors are different. The textures are different.
And so then compare Bryce to Zion.
Gosh, they're so different, because Bryce, the colors are completely different. And a lot of it for me is the textures of the rock that you're seeing. Because at Bryce, you're just seeing all the hoodoo formations, which it's like rock that's just got bumps and lumps and layers and striations that are going down to the right. And then right beside them, there's layers and striations that are going the complete opposite way, just because it's based on how the wind's blowing and how the rock's eroding at that particular time. And then the wind blows the other way. So you just have all the different striations and the colors and the lumps and the textures, which is also based on the different types of rock layers that there are, because the different rock layers erode in different manners, kind of thing. And then Zion is more, to me, it's a little more typical of your, like a mountain type hike, mountains, canyon, but to me, it just seems more like you're in the mountains.
I guess when you say more mountain, it doesn't have as many of the chunks coming out of it, maybe.
Yeah, there's not as many of the chunks coming out of it like Bryce does. It's more uniform, like a mountain of rock canyon. It's more one huge rock in a mountain type shape next to another huge rock of a different type that's in a mountain type shape. As opposed to a lot of the other places, you kind of come in from the top and you're looking down into a canyon. Zion is more at the bottom. You start and you stay at the bottom and then hike up to the tops of things.
You're going to have to go to the website, activetraveladventures.com, and check out the photos, because it is difficult to describe. So tell us about your hikes in Zion.
Driving from Bryce to Zion, we stopped at Red Rock Canyon State Park, kind of a mixture. It's the hoodoos, but a little more into the mountain rock. It was a way to break up the drive a little bit, get out, stretch your legs, do some hiking. This is the place where I proved that God is a Longhorn. I'm from Texas, and I graduated from Texas. And so we were out doing this little hike, and you come around the bend and there's this big, huge rock, and it's orange. And it's just got the perfect two spires on the ends. Looks like the Hook 'em Horns sign. That was just so fun for me because I'm a big Texas fan. And I was like, look, it's Hook 'em Horns. And everyone knew exactly what I was talking about too. But that was a nice, pretty little, stretch your legs, clean on the way.
And that's something I like about Active too, because when you do have a driving thing, you don't just do bathroom breaks. They get you out and moving.
Yes, they are very good about that. They're very good about doing some of the out of the way kind of local knowledge kind of stuff. You see the big touristy things, but you also get to see a lot of the smaller local, a little more out of the way type things that are just as cool. It's just not as many people, not as many people know about it and go do it because they're on their, let me check this one view off my list and go on to the next one.
Right.
So to speak, Active is very good about that.
I agree.
So that day we got into Zion and we came in on one side, and we were on one side of the park, and we were staying on the complete opposite side. We drove like all through the park, and it was amazing. Everyone was sitting next to the windows, and you're staring, and you've just got your phone, and you're videoing and taking pictures just out your window. There's so many different parts to it. Even then, there's one area where it's big, huge, what I call a mountain rock. Like it looks like a checkerboard. Literally just the way the striations have formed. And with the colors, you've got, striations that are going perfectly vertical. And then you've got ones that are going horizontal. And it just looks like a big checkerboard. And I think that is the name of it. I think they call it Checkerboard Rock. You drive through the tunnels. That was amazing. It was beautiful. There's one lodge that's in the park itself, right there in the middle. I can't remember what the name of it is, but there's just this huge, humongous, wide open, green grassy area. And that's where we stopped and had our lunch that day. So you're just having lunch out in the sun on this green, lush grass in the middle of all this scenery. Then after lunch, we went up to hike Angel's Landing and Scouts Landing, which we were very excited about because with COVID, a lot of the trails and places had been closed. And Angel's Landing, getting all the way up to the top to Angel's Landing, it's the chain walk.
Many people have heard of Angel's Landing and Knife Edge. Talk about this a little in detail, if you would.
Yeah, Angel's Landing was beautiful. It had been closed like most of the summer, and they had just opened it up earlier in the week. And so we got to hike it. We were very excited because we didn't think we were going to get to hike it because it had been closed the whole time. Going up to Angel's Landing, a little over 2.5 miles, I think. And so a lot of people have that, oh, well, let's go hike this. It's only 2.5 miles, but it's 2.5 miles of up. You can hike up to Scouts Landing, which is absolutely beautiful and gorgeous. And then there's about another half mile where you walk up the chain to get up to the top to Angel's Landing. It's more than a 1,500-foot elevation gain in those first 2 miles.
All right, I got a question too about the chain. So as long as you're holding on to the chain, do you feel safe?
Yeah. I mean, some people, I totally understand why some people are a lot more nervous. I totally felt safe. It's just one of those, when you think about it, it's what I call the scary fun. And the other thing that makes it more nerve-wracking for people, I think, is because there is one chain that goes, you're kind of walking up a ridge as well. So you're on a ridge and there's a big drop off on the left side and there's a drop off, pretty good drop off on the right side.
Yes.
And you've also, when you're doing it, you've got people coming from both directions on the same chain. You're climbing up and over rocks sometimes with that. So sometimes you have to, if someone's coming down, you have to communicate and decide who's going. You have to kind of back up and go flat against the wall. Maybe, you're not holding on to the chain because you got to let the people in front of you climb down and go so that you can climb up and go around. So that's a little more nerve-wracking for some people. But once you get up there, it's an amazing view. We got up there and I don't know if it was me or one of us in our group. Once we got up there, we were like, man, I feel like such a badass. Just think about and look back on, kind of what you climbed up, to get there, and just like you're on top of the world, so to speak, looking at everything. And this was another area where the group split. Not everyone wanted to go all the way up to the top. Some people were just like, no, that makes me too nervous. Some people were, no, I'm just too tired. I'd rather just stay and sit here at Scouts Landing and stare at the incredible beauty. You're not missing scenery or anything by not going all the way up to Angel's Landing. But if you get up to Angel's Landing, it's amazing.
And can you make that decision at the decision point, or do you have to tell the guides in advance?
Oh, no. You make the decision once you get there. You go your 2.2 miles with your more than 1,500 feet elevation gain up to Scouts Landing. But once we get up there and we're taking our pictures and staring at things, then people kind of make the decision who wants to go, who doesn't want to go, etc. And so there were probably about half our group went ahead and went up to Angel's Landing, and the others hung out there at Scout. From Scouts Landing up to Angels, it's only about a half mile. Mm-hmm. But like I said, it's a half mile up the chain. I think I have a picture, tries to show some of the perspective. We were pretty fortunate when we were there because it had just opened up again. So not a ton of people realized or recognized that it was open because it had been closed most all of the summer. So there wasn't a ton of people there when we were there. I think usually there's a lot more people. I got to go on this beautiful vacation it's in my own backyard. I had just never done it, but I got to go on this beautiful vacation. We got to do some hikes and some things without the huge hordes of tourists because people weren't traveling as much. For this hike, it had just recently opened up.
Yeah, when the world opens up, I think we're going to have this window, although from what I'm hearing from some of the tour operators is they are swamped with orders. People are just tired of COVID and they're ready to get out and do things. So did you do anything else fun?
We went canyoneering.
Cool.
It's another great activity to do when you're out there. So we got to go canyoneering, which was a blast. We went out to some slack canyons and hike up to the top, and we gear up in our harnesses and our helmets, etc., and then rappel down. So we'll rappel down this big rock wall, and then we'd hike a little bit through the canyon. We'd come to another one and rappel down that one.
Oh, fun.
Do a little bit of down climbing through the slats where there's kind of a big drop off. The drop off's big enough that you don't want to just jump, but the slot is so narrow. You basically put your back up against one wall and your hands and the feet are against the other, and you just kind of down climb your way closer to the ground until you can jump. And then we actually climbed up one of the canyon walls. We climbed up one side and then dropped down, rappelled down on the other side.
Now, are you in some kind of a harness this whole time?
Yeah, we're in harnesses, professional guides. You are clipped in the whole time.
You can't get hurt unless it's some kind of a freak thing.
Yeah, we all did it, the entire group.
And you did the canyoneering because the Narrows actually had some kind of a toxic algae bloom or something. So you and the tour group had to pivot, as I understand it.
The company is very good about that. It's one of the things they kind of tell you up front, even on their website. They're like, this is our plan, this is what we do. But again, sometimes Mother Nature doesn't cooperate. But every trip that I've been on where Mother Nature didn't cooperate in some way, the alternative that we did, a lot of times it's like, well, I think that was better than what we were going to do. But they are excellent at having alternatives for things, and not just for weather-wise, but also having alternatives for members of the group of, someone got sick or hurt or whatever. They're good about having backups that they can do that other person can do if they couldn't hike for the day or something.
Yeah, in fact, on the North Island, New Zealand, I don't know if you did this or not, it wasn't part of the itinerary, but there's only 3 of us. All 3 of us were same fitness that we were actually ahead of schedule. So we snuck in a whitewater rafting adventure.
We did too. Ours, they told us, they're like, don't tell them we did this. The highest commercial waterfall rafting in the world. It was amazing.
Yes, that was fun. But if you had 13 people, you may not have been able to pull that off because 13 people move slower, so they may not have been able to fit that in.
Yes, I had a very small group of ours too, and so that's why we got to fit that in as well.
Yeah, no, so it's nice that they didn't just have a half a day. Well, you guys finished, just go sit at the lodge.
The company's very good about making sure that people are having a good time and that they're okay. They're very good at reading group dynamics as well as individual, dynamics to see, because if they feel like, you're having trouble with something, they'll discreetly kind of pull you off to the side. Are you doing okay? Is there something we can do, etc.
And did they prepare a lot of your food for you like they did in New Zealand? Or tell us about the food and lodging and all that kind of stuff too.
The food we had on this trip was absolutely fantastic. This trip, we ate out for dinner every night. That's not always the case on some of these trips. Some of the nights, the guides cook the dinner for you. This trip, we ate out at a restaurant every night. And it was fabulous restaurants. Like I think when we were in Capitol Reef, I had elk for dinner. You eat a lot on these trips, because when you go out to dinner, it's a order what you want kind of dinner. It's not okay, you can choose from this or this or this. It's here's the menu, you pick what you want. I had elk one night, dessert every night. Someone asked me partway through the trip if I was on a cheesecake tour, because I had cheesecake. Every single restaurant that we went to, I think I had cheesecake for dessert. It was so good. Lunch, we ate at this awesome pizza restaurant in Escalante. But most of the days for lunch was either a sandwich that we packed and prepared in the morning and carried in our backpack, or we'd stop somewhere and they cooked. And when it was days they cooked, that food and meals is just as good as all the others. I mean, we had tacos and always dessert, fruit one night. They're very good about the food. When they cook the food, they're very good about making sure there's something everyone can eat there. You know, if you're gluten-free type person, you are totally taken care of. When it's stuff that they cook, if you're vegetarian or vegan, like they're very good about incorporating.
Well, they even ask you your food preferences when you fill out your booking.
Yes, they ask you when you're booking, and they go down, you know, to the level of, you know, I'm a pescatarian. I learned types of foodies that people were, you know, when I booked their website, I'm like, oh, what's a pescatarian? Oh, I eat fish, but nothing else besides vegetables. Diet-wise, they cater and incorporate whatever your dietary needs are, and you don't miss out on anything. Because I typically do gluten-free, and I did not miss out on desserts. They cooked, I didn't miss out on desserts. Here's the gluten-free bread, you know, to make your sandwich. Always vegetarian options. We had I don't know if he was vegetarian or vegan, but we had some of all the different foodie types like on our trip, and we all ate basically the same thing. You didn't feel different. You know, it's like, oh, I have to have my special little thing over here, not like everybody else's.
Tell us about the lodging.
The first part of the trip, you're just kind of in standard hotels. They're not 5-star hotels. This is not a 5-star hotel kind of trip when you're doing these kind of trips. You're not hanging out in the hotel. You go, you take a shower, you sleep. Usually all the hotels we had hot breakfast. And so that was where and how we had breakfast every morning. That's the other thing about, like, when we were in Moab, like, our hotel was in the perfect place. It was right there downtown in the midst of everything. So when we did have some downtime and on our own, we're right there in the middle of everything. When we were out in Capitol Reef, that's kind of an out in the middle of nowhere kind of thing. And again, it's an average hotel. We had a great balcony. All our rooms had balconies there, which was beautiful. So we would just sit out on our balcony in the evening and just stare at the night sky and the landscape, get up early and watch the sunrise. Beautiful kind of stuff. And when we got to Zion, the hotel was super nice. And it's right there on the strip outside of the park. That was the nicest hotel that we stayed in. And it was very nice.
Any other things I should have asked you about your 5 national park adventure in Utah?
Not anything that I can necessarily think of. Oh, food-wise. The last night of the trip, you know, you all go out to dinner together. Well, one of the other things on this trip, because of COVID, we couldn't sit together, you know, like all, including the guides and stuff, like 15 of us in a group together. We had to break it up, you know, into smaller tables of, I think 6 was the max that we were allowed to have. So we had a couple different tables of groups. But the last night, the restaurant that we ate at, that was probably my favorite restaurant. Kind of a Mexican flair, Southwest kind of Mexican flair. You know, it was great. And drinking margaritas. I had sweet potato tamales, which I cannot tell you how great those were. They were just amazing. But the last night that's always a fun. It's a sad night because, you know, it's your last night. You're having to leave. The vacation's over, so to speak. But it's always a good time.
Do you keep up with any of the folks from the trip?
I have on some of my other active trips. I have kept up with some of them. And I've actually met some of the same people on some of my trips with active.
Was that coordinated or just there were other repeats?
No, totally uncoordinated. I think one of my trips, they were on the Nepal trip was where I met them. You know, I met them when we were on the Nepal trip. They were in my group. And then a few years later, I was doing the Mont Blanc circuit, one of their European trips, and go down in the lobby to meet everybody. And there's the same people. So that's happened on 2 or 3 of my trips where
Well, it's typical of Active Adventures clients too. I mean, it's not unheard of for me to talk to people. Oh, this is my 8th trip or my 7th trip, and yours.
8. I love Active. I love the company. I love the way they run their trips. I tell people if they're going somewhere new, I will sign up for their trip without seeing the itinerary.
Yes.
I know how they're going to run their trip. I know what the things they're going to take me to do. They're going to keep me active.
There'll be lots of variety of activities.
Yes.
And if there's options so that you're going to not just be hiking, it's always predominantly hiking, I think. But like in the Galapagos, it wasn't, because that's more water-based.
Yeah. And there's lots of the trips. This day you might go, you have the option. You can go mountain biking or you can go kayaking, and this day we go kayaking, or there's typically some of the trips are all mainly hiking focused, but a lot of them are multi-adventure type trips.
Definitely. So which is your next active trip? Do you have anything planned?
My next active trips, I don't know which one. I want to do Africa and Iceland.
Good. Which are the Africa trips?
I would like to hike Kilimanjaro, just that's one of the bucket lists, but I feel like if it's my first time going to Africa, I feel like I got to go on one of the animal safari type trips. Well,
you can also tie in, they do a safari like 4 or 5 days that you can tie in with the Kili trip in Tanzania.
Yes, I've thought about that. If I have to plan that trip far enough in advance, because that's a little more expensive. Africa's a more expensive trip in general anyway, but then kind of adding that on, it's like, I might pull the trigger and do both. You never know. But Africa and Iceland those are the 2 big country areas, so to speak, that I haven't been on.
Did you do Patagonia?
Yes.
How did you like that?
Patagonia, hiked the W. That was every trip that I have with them is just, it's always amazing. Peru, hiked Machu Picchu. I think that was my 2nd trip with them.
So it sounds like you've done all the South American trips.
Yes, I've done all those. I haven't done the Ecuador trip. I don't think they had the part of the Ecuador trip when I was over there doing Galapagos. I did a little bit of stuff on my own when I was there. Going and standing on the equator, that's an amazing you think it's one of those little tourist traps, and it is, but going and doing the standing right on the equator, straddling the lines. And I learned all kinds of things on, how you've always heard, in North America, when you flush the toilet, it swirls to the right. And if you go down Southern Hemisphere, New Zealand, it swirls to the left. It's really true. Like, it's even true, literally, if you just move it 2 feet. When you're on this side of the line, is one of the things they demonstrated. And this was one of the things I did on my own. This wasn't part of the trip, but it may be part of the trip now that they have the Ecuador trip. I don't know. But they had basically like a sink, and they had a bucket underneath to catch the water, and then fill the sink up with water and put a leaf in there and then drain it. And you can see everything spin to the right. They'd move it 2 feet to the other side of the line, and it totally goes the other way. And if you put it if you put the sink like right on the line, it does not swirl at all. It just drops straight down.
That's hysterical.
It's amazing. Like, it's so weird. There's a couple other little tricks they have like that it's just so weird. You move 2 feet and something completely different happens.
When you're in Iceland, you'll straddle the tectonic plates. So you'll have
cool.
1 foot in Europe and 1 foot in North America.
Yeah, things like that. It's just so fun.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Is there any advice or anything that we should share before we sign off?
My advice is go do it. Don't be afraid. Just go do it. You'll have a great time. Again, Active is very good about they're straight shooters. They tell you exactly like it is. If you read their website, those are the kind of things you do. When they give you the packing list, that's what you need. I've learned a lot about how to pack on a trip from doing their trips. And I'm like, really? No, I can't believe that's all that I need to take. And then you get going, and it's like, that is all I needed. I packed all this extra stuff.
There you go.
So I learned a lot about how to pack light going on their trips, but read the website. If you like what you see on the website, that's what their trip is going to be like. They don't throw surprises. Some of the trips, like I remember one of the New Zealand trips that I went on, you stay in this like sheep shearing station. You don't have an individual room, and it's a community bathroom, so to speak, but it tells you up front, right in their thing, we stay here in one of these type places.
And that was so cool. It was one of the highlights. We had this spectacular sunset.
Yes.
Right on top of Mount Cook. It looked like it was photoshopped, but that's exactly what we saw and how we saw it.
Yes, it's awesome. But I do remember on that trip specifically, because there was a person on the trip that I feel obviously did not read the website at all, or the itinerary. I'm like, it tells you on the itinerary, this is what you're doing. Why are you surprised? It's just, they're such a great company. I say, go do it. Don't be afraid to go do it. It's amazing. And a tip, if you plan, because some people, expense is a lot of some people's concern about doing these kind of things. That's one of the things that I really like, because if you plan your trip far enough in advance, like a trip planned for next summer, I can start paying for it now. If I commit, if I know, here's when I'm taking my vacation, I'm signed up for this trip the last 3 weeks of September. To me, it doesn't seem like it costs as much, because I just send a little money, here and there over time. So then when the trip comes, my trip's all paid for. I didn't have to take a big chunk out of the bank.
That's another thing I like too. It's almost all inclusive.
Yes, virtually everything is included. They tell you up front, they're flat out honest. This night dinner is on your own. This night dinner is on your own.
And I liked how the dinners that were on us were in towns where we wanted to pick different options. We weren't out in the middle of nowhere. This is a choice that we would have taken anyway. I like how not everything is structured, that sometimes you do have free time, and always in a cool place.
Some places you go, they'll tell you today is a free afternoon. You have the afternoon to yourself to do what you want, but they'll tell you, here's the things that you should really think about doing. And sometimes it's, activities. So sometimes it's okay, we're all going to go paragliding this afternoon because it's our free day. They're good about telling that. And their pre-trip information, they tell you, we recommend this much, or, and they'll tell you, we recommend not bringing cash. They don't like American dollars over there. So, wait and do this.
And I would recommend when they say, oh, this is an add-on that you have to book ahead of time. I did the heli hike up in the Franz Josef Glacier. So those kinds of add-ons, you don't have to do them. They'll have an alternative. And that day I was hiking somewhere, but that add-on was so worth the money. But it's nice that you have the option, and they help you plan in your budget that way.
Yeah, for sure. And the fact, like we said, most everything is paid for the trip while you're there. So, when you're there on the vacation, to me, you're not spending extra money when you're there, because you've already paid for that beforehand. So for one night that you're going out to dinner on your own and paying for it, you'd be doing that if you were at home at your house. You'd be going out to dinner one night, kind of thing. The other thing that I would say about Active and the guides is they do a really great job on helping you with other things and help lining up other stuff for you. Because like I said, at the end of the trip, I had planned to stay a few extra days in Zion. So departure morning, we went for another beautiful sunrise hike, kind of our last hike all together. And then when we got back, everyone was leaving to go to the airport, but, I was staying on. So I said, I asked them beforehand, I'm like, can you just leave me at the hotel because I'm staying on? And that was fine. It was no big deal. They also helped me set up and organize some of the stuff that I was doing over the next few days, because when we were there, because of COVID, the shuttle systems in the park to get you out to some of the areas, they weren't running like they normally were. So getting around, you either got a bike to ride to the trails that you wanted, or you walked. And so they found a place and got a bike rental set up for me and that kind of thing. So I had a very enjoyable afterward trip because they helped me organize the logistics for stuff that was on my own, which they totally didn't have to do.
Thank you so much for coming on the program, Allie. You've been a wealth of information, not only about the Big 5 national parks of Utah, but also about travel in general, and I really appreciate your time.
Yes, thanks. It was fun. I love talking about my vacations.
So like I mentioned in the beginning, I am actually on my way to Utah. I'm on the border right now as I'm editing this. Utah and visiting the national parks of Utah is one of the few places with all the places in the world, and there's so many places and not enough time and not enough money. I have always wanted to return to these, particularly now that I'm a hiker, because I was not a hiker the first time I went out there, which is maybe like a dozen or so years ago. So I am super excited to, actually I'll be hitting Zion tomorrow myself, and I'm stoked. If you want to hear more about my trip, you'll hear those on the Sophie Diaries on the third Thursday of each month. I kind of recap some of the things I've learned about my camper van travels, some of the places I've gone, and try to help you to not make some of the same mistakes that I'm making and learn from some of the experiences that I've been having on this amazing road trip that I've been on in my camper van Sophie. So I hope you'll join me for those. Nowadays, it's not subscribe. The word is now called follow. So if you love the Active Travel Adventures podcast, be sure to follow it on whatever podcast app that you're listening to. I would sure appreciate it. And if you wouldn't mind, please share this episode with your favorite adventure friends. Appreciate that as well. I want to remind you, too, that Active Adventures is an affiliate of mine. And what that means to you is at no additional cost to you. You're helping to support the program if you use my links, and you have to use my links in order for me to get credit, and I would earn a small commission on any bookings that you do. Also, if you will email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com, I can give you a promo code that will give you a special discount. So not only will it not cost you anymore to use my links, I can help you save some money too. So be sure to email me, kit@activetraveladventures.com. And I'll give you that promo code. They do not want me advertising that, so people just can't Google and get free discounts. So I understand that. And I'm very grateful to them for giving us this generous discount code. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!